everyone. Welcome into the Penn State 365 podcast presented by Nittany Nation of the Rivals Network, covering all things Penn State athletics on the field of play and on the recruiting trail. My name is Dylan Callagahan-Croley, beat writer and recruiting analyst at Nittany Nation. I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Marty Leap of Black Shoe Diaries, and our resident superfan, Anthony Hazan. We're, of course, coming to you on YouTube as well. We're going to make sure we start doing these on YouTube every week, just so you can guys can see all our great faces, as well as add a little bit more to our podcast, and not visually as well for YouTube going forward. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about Penn State's somewhat revamped wide receiver room, I guess you could say. Really, from top to bottom, Penn State on Monday hired wide receivers coach Marques Hagans from Virginia, as well as landing transfer wide receivers Dante, Cephas, and Malik McClain over the last 8 days. So a lot has happened with the wide receiver room for the Nittany Lions since the last time we talked. Me and Marty did try to get an episode out last week talking about Cephas and McClain, but some audio errors made our episode a little unshareable, so we decided to wait until the Nittany Lions fulfilled their wide receiver coaching vacancy, and that's what they did on Monday. As I said, hiring Marques Hagans from Virginia, a guy who is, as me and Marty and Anthony discussed right before the episode, an absolute legend down in Virginia. Was with the Cavaliers from 2000 to 2005 as a player, spent 2005, 2010 in the NFL before returning to Charlottesville as a graduate assistant before becoming the Cavaliers wide receivers coach in 2013, a position that he held all the way up until Monday when he became the Nittany Lions' newest wide receivers coach. Guys, let's jump right into it. Marty, we'll start with you. You have some familiar background. Not familiar. You have a little bit of a deeper background knowledge on Hagans than most of us here, probably. So, what is your thoughts on Marques Hagans? I have my thoughts. I'll give them after you, and then I'll jump to Anthony.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons, I think Hagans is a great hire by Penn State. I mean, when Taylor Stubblefield was fired, if you would have asked me to name a top 3 or 4 guys I'd most like to see James Franklin hire, Hagans would have undoubtedly been on that list. He is a great developer of talent. You look at what he did at Virginia, and this is not a slight on any of those receivers, but you look at what he was able to get out of what he had on his roster. That's saying something, man. And most importantly to me, he is incredibly connected recruiting-wise in the Tidewater area. Now, people talk about Penn State and dominating the state of Virginia in recruiting, and from Richmond on up, they've done a phenomenal job. The Tidewater down through Roanoke, down to Newport News, Virginia Beach, it's not been kind to them. Outside of Keandre Lambert-Smith, they've really struggled to recruit that part of Virginia. I guess you could throw Katron Allen in there because he's originally from that area, but obviously came to Penn State from IMG. But as I was telling you guys off air before we started recording, I have family who live in Newport News, Virginia, and down through the Tidewater region, which is just talent-rich. There are 2, maybe 3 names that you go down there and you say that name, you have an association with it, people's ears peck up and they listen to what you got to say. It's Dre Bly, it's Michael Vick, and it's Marques Hagans. Bly, obviously, no longer on the coaching staff in North Carolina. In recent years, North Carolina really recruited the Tidewater well for a long time before that, and this is a big reason why Frank Beamer built what he did in Blacksburg. Virginia Tech completely locked down the Tidewater region. Well, with Dre Bly out of North Carolina and Brent Pry, who I still think can do good things at Virginia Tech's got a lot of way to go, that Tidewater region's wide open right now. With Marques Hagans as your wide receivers coach, if you're Penn State, you've got to view that as an opportunity to pounce on this. Not to say Penn State all of a sudden is going to go from not being able to land anyone in the Tidewater region to going down there and dominating it or anything. But with Marques Hagans, you're automatically going to always have an in with any coach, any recruit, any player, any school in the Tidewater region. And Penn State has that now. And like I said, the guy's a phenomenal coach, too, in terms of ability to develop wide receivers. Played wide receiver in the NFL. So I think that is a factor there. I think, we'll get into this not just today, but potentially in later episodes. I think Keandre Lambert-Smith is going to benefit greatly from having Hagans as his wide receivers coach. It's just phenomenal hire by James Franklin. I think an absolute, I'm not going to go as far to say it's a grand slam of a hire, but, this is probably a game-tying home run in the bottom of the 8th inning type of thing. Really, really strong hire.
Absolutely agree. And quickly, before I get into what you're talking about, let me really read James Franklin's statement regarding hiring Marques Hagans. We're excited to add Marques to our family. He is a veteran coach whose experiences playing both quarterback and wide receiver at the highest levels will be tremendous value to our program. Marques has a proven track record of developing receivers throughout his career and has worked alongside many coaches I respect. Marques is a relationship-based leader whose family values align with the culture of Penn State. We are thrilled to welcome Marques, his wife Lauren, and sons Christopher and Jackson to Happy Valley. As we said, Hagans has been on that staff at Virginia since 2010, 2011, and has been the wide receivers coach since 2013. A couple more just little facts to throw out about his time there. During his time in Charlottesville, Hagans coached 10 of the top 15 players in career receptions at Virginia. Led by Alameda Zacchaeus and his program record 250 receptions. Zacchaeus is currently, of course, now with the Atlanta Falcons and originally out of St. Joe's Prep in Philadelphia. He also coached players like Keaton Thompson, Dontavian Wicks, and the list goes on, Lavelle Davis Jr. He for what they brought in down at Charlottesville, which is a hard place to recruit. The academic standards there are very high. It's a hard place to get those 4 or 5-star players in. That's why, over the course of Virginia's history, they've had, 1 or 2 5-stars, I think, in the online recruiting era. Tough place to recruit, but he's done pretty well down there, and he's great at developing those guys as well. You bring up that Virginia Beach Tidewater area, and you said it perfectly. You look at Penn State's history. I went back and looked at it today, and I mapped it out. I shared it with you guys. You look at Penn State's recruitment of Virginia as a whole. There's hot spots around Richmond. There's hot spots around Washington, D.C. area, a little bit down in Fredericksburg. But then there's only one player they've really pulled out of that Virginia Beach Tidewater area, and that's Keandre Lambert-Smith, somebody Marty did mention. And Hagans is going to be, challenged very quickly here in his Penn State tenure by having to go out and land in 2024 wide receiver Keelan Adams out of Virginia Beach. Number 3 player in the state of Virginia here at Rivals, number 170 overall, a top 25 wide receiver in the country. One of the Nittany Lions' top prospects on their wide receiver board is I don't want to say a must-have, but he's pretty close to it, and that's going to be a big challenge for him early on. But I think Hagans is going to be able to come in and be a very good recruiter for Penn State. I'm not saying he's going to come in and be a Brian Hardline. There's very few of those coaches at any position in the country. But I think Penn State's wide receiver recruitment could definitely see quite the tick up under Hagans, especially consider what it was the last cycle under Taylor Stubblefield. I think Taylor Stubblefield as a recruiter did a quality job. I think it could have been better, however. The 2023 class obviously was a bit of a letdown for the Nittany Lions. 2022 was solid. But overall, I think Hagans is a very good hire for Penn State. I think we're going to see a lot of it pay off on the development side. Things which I think is going to be big for the Nittany Lions. Because as we about talk, they are bringing in one established guy in Dante Cephas. They do have Keandre Lambert-Smith, who's probably the next closest thing to being an established player, but that's even a little bit on the borderline. But outside of Cephas, they really don't have a true established wide receiver. And Hagans is going to now have this spring, summer, and fall to work with those guys. So it's going to be a big offseason for him in his first year with the Nittany Lions. Anthony, let's go to you. What's your thoughts on the hire of Marques Hagans?
Yeah, you guys did a tremendous job of really covering, what this means for the Nittany Lions and why this makes sense. For me personally, I think in the short term, in the next year or so, there are 2 things I'm really looking to see with Marques Hagans in terms of what he can do for the Nittany Lions. The first thing I'm looking at is his recruiting. I think that's the biggest question mark on him right now is how can he recruit for a school like Penn State? Obviously, like you guys said, it is really difficult to recruit at Virginia. I don't think people realize just how difficult it is to recruit for Virginia, just because I've looked at their last 5 to 6 classes or so. If they pull 2 4-stars in any given cycle, that's a good cycle for them. So it's really hard to judge what type of recruiter he can be, but he's going to have his first test getting guys like Kalen Adams and Chance Wiggins, as well as a guy like Mekhi White, who you highlighted, Dylan, is already immediately super interested in Penn State more than he already was because of the hire of Hagans.
Yeah, correct.
So I think those are his biggest tests. If he can land 2 of those 3, if not all 3, he'll ingratiate himself to Penn State very, very early and this fan base. The second thing, and this is where he shines, I think, is his development. And more importantly, I'm going to be looking at his development of Keandre Lambert-Smith. Like Marty pointed out, Keandre Lambert-Smith is from the Tidewater region, and this is a huge year for him. I'd imagine there's already a relationship established there with Hagans from his past recruitment. I'm very interested to see if Hagans can get something extra out of Lambert-Smith in his development. If he can do that, I really think Keandre Lambert-Smith has the potential to be a wide receiver 1 type of player. I think the tools are all there. If Hagans can get that out of him, again, I think he'll really ingratiate himself to this fan base. So those are the 2 things I'm looking for in the short term. But overall, I like this hire. Like you guys said, Penn State can never have too many connections in the DMV. And in terms of the Tidewater region, Hagans has one of, if not the best connections possible. And he always had Virginia's wide receiver room as one of the best on that roster. And that's not a very talent-laden roster. So, yeah, I like the hire, and I'm excited to see how it works out.
Yeah, great points by you there. A little bit more on Marques Hagans for our listeners. For those who are college football fans in general, you may have remember over the last few years before this past year under head coach Tony Elliott that the Cavaliers were one of the most prolific passing attacks in the country with quarterback Brennan Armstrong. Hagans and his wide receiver room was a big part of that. A couple years ago, he had 3 wide receivers record 70-plus receptions. That is an incredible number. I don't care what type of offense you are in. To have that many wide receivers be able to be that consistent of a threat in the passing game, be that consistent of a playmaker, is very impressive. And that's what I think is most impressive. He's not just having 1 or 2 guys across these teams at Virginia who could be top wide receivers, but he was developing quality depth at the wide receiver position, which you look at Penn State the last 2 years, they've had a good number 1, number 2 wide receiver, maybe an okay number 3, but the depth as you went on was pretty thin. And for Penn State, if they're going to be national championship contenders in 2023 and 2024, as they want to be, having that depth at wide receiver is going to be awfully important. Also notable, Hagans did have some overlap at Virginia with Penn State safety coach Anthony Poindexter, which is just worth passing along. I'm sure Poindexter did have not a say, but I'm sure he had some influence in this decision. They're both on the staff at Virginia from 2010 through 2013. And then the other thing I really only pass on is that Hagans was a big constant in that Virginia program. I mean, not only was he there for 9 years, but he was there under 3 different head coaches. That says a lot about what, like Marty said at the beginning, what people in the area think about him, what high school coaches around the area think about him, but what coaches around the country think about him. Because he was under there, Mike London, Bronco Mendenhall, and now Tony Elliott. And that's impressive. You can stay in one spot through 3 different coaches. So, I mean, it all works out. Hagans is the top guy that I think could be sticking around Happy Valley for a while, unless, he has higher aspirations, which you wouldn't be shocked. But at age 40, he still has plenty of time to chase all those aspirations. So, I mean, you're still getting a young upstart, coach right here, because at 40, I mean, that's when a lot of guys are just breaking into the FBS ranks at position coaches sometimes, let alone going from a place like Virginia to an even higher step up to Penn State. Any other final thoughts on the hiring of Marques Hagans from either of you?
Two quick things there. You mentioned the recruiting, and Virginia is a difficult place to recruit at in general, but also it's one of those when you walk into a school, even if it's an in-state school, that logo on your chest means something. And even any school in Virginia, you walk in there with that Penn State logo, that's going to carry a lot more weight than that Virginia Cavalier logo. And also, Dylan, you mentioned Dex and Hagans crossing paths at Virginia on the coaching staff with the Cavaliers, and that potentially, playing a role in maybe not necessarily James Franklin hiring Marques Hagans, but definitely at least, listening to getting some input from Anthony Poindexter on what that may have meant. I think that does carry some weight also. I mean, these are two guys who, as you look to continue to just really dominate this region, two guys who are just living legends at the University of Virginia. So, I think you just continue to add these coaches with such great connections, such great ties, such great pull in the region, and that will go a long way in recruiting.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at the press release actually released by Penn State, it may just be coincidence, but his son Christopher's middle name is Dex, so perhaps him and Poindexter are that close, or perhaps it's just a coincidence. I'm not 100% sure yet. That'll be something we could possibly find out down the road, but I just thought that was a potentially unique little tidbit there. All right, let's go to the guys who's going to be coaching. So we mentioned they brought in Dante, Cephas, Malik, McClain. Let's start with Dante Cephas. He was one of Penn State's top targets in the transfer portal this offseason. They missed on a few, obviously, but they got Cephas, which is a big one. I mean, this is a game-changing talent, potentially at wide receiver. A guy who I think will fit in that X wide receiver role very well for them. McClain could fit in that role too, more so body-wise, but we'll see what they go with because McClain also has the ability to stretch the field vertically. But Cephas is a guy who at Kent State was one of the top G5 wide receivers in the country. Had a little bit of a slower 2022 season, but his 2021 season for the Flashes was just phenomenal. Give me 1 second as I pull up the stats. But in that 2021 season, 82 receptions, 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns. This year, in just 9 games, 48 receptions, 744 yards, 3 touchdowns. A little bit of a dip, but still a very good season out of Cephas, a Pittsburgh native here. So Terry Smith obviously played a big role in this recruitment as well. But let's talk about Cephas here, what he brings to the Nittany Lions. Good, solid size, 6'1", rather strong wide receiver. Good speed, not elite speed, but somebody I think who really could fit into this wide receiver room very well, help stretch the field, and be a number one threat for the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. I think that Penn State has found their wide receiver one with Dante Cephas. You could argue he was their top wide receiver target in the transfer portal. And yeah, there's a reason why they like him so much. He has that potential to be, that number one type of player. I believe he was a 2-time MAC first team all MAC player. Like you said, he put up monster numbers at Kent State, especially in 2021, where he had 82 receptions. I think he still has some things to work on. He's not a finished product. Probably needs a little bit of work on his route running. Probably needs to add a little bit of weight. I think, Chuck Losey in that weight room is going to do him a lot of good. But still, when you can get your top target in the portal, depending, I don't know, what does Rivals have him ranked in their portal rankings? I know they probably got him as a top 5 receiver in the transfer portal overall. So, can't go wrong. And
yeah, let me go, Chuck.
Marty, any thoughts? While Dylan's
checking.
Sorry,
my internet crapped there for a second. Go ahead.
No, I agree with everything you said. He's wide receiver one. Cephas is a playmaker. He can stretch the field. He's got great hands. He was their top portal target for a reason. I think it's safe to say not just a receiver, regardless of position. he was their top portal target. If you want to read the Twitter tea leaves, this is one Penn State's been back channeling since about September. He was arguably the best wide receiver in the transfer portal. Anthony, you mentioned him being a Pittsburgh guy, the ties to Terry Smith. I mean, everybody in Pittsburgh seemingly is related to Terry Smith in some fashion. Dante Cephas was also a high school teammate of Daquan Hardy, so he was someone who visited Penn State quite a bit while in high school, so I'm sure that didn't hurt either. The relationship was already there with James Franklin. Tremendous get. This wide receiver room in a course of about 72 hours last week went from being a major question mark to, while there are definitely still question marks, being a room that has got some really, really high potential for 2023, especially when you factor in the guy who's going to be throwing them the football.
Yeah, before we get to Dylan, I do want to ask, what do we think are realistic expectations for Dante Cephas? Like, I know that we all want him to be that Jahan Dotson type of player where he had 90 receptions and 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns like he did in 2021, but do we think that's realistic, or do we think you could expect something more similar to what maybe a Mitchell Tinsley put up last year, maybe a little bit better than that? I'd love to hear what you guys think.
Tinsley, I think the true expectations for almost any G5 to Power 5 wide receiver should be probably around what unless it's a truly special talent. Which, I mean, Cephas is a very good talent, a great talent even. He's not an elite level talent, at least that we think so far. But I think a Tinsley type season is what should be expected. I mean, Tinsley put together 51 receptions, 577 yards, 5 touchdowns this year. And that was with Parker Washington still being the number one wide receiver. I think now Cephas is going into the year as number one, maybe a little bit above that, so maybe 6 to 7. But I think closer to a Mitchell Tinsley impact is what you're likely going to see, more so than a Jahan Dotson level impact. Marty? By the way, he was on Rivals, our 9th ranked wide receiver, but there are some pretty strong names ahead of him. Aaron Anderson, Dominic Lovett, Dante Thornton, Chris Marshall, JoJo Early, Kevin Coleman, Theo Reese, and Ra Thomas, who got in trouble already at Georgia.
I mean, if you look at Dante Cephas, to me, if he can give you the production of Mitchell Tinsley, Tinsley this year, 577 yards and 5 scores. But I think the difference between the two is they're very different players. Cephas is the kind of guy who, I mean, I agree with what you said on G5, the Power 5 for receiver. But 2 things. 1, no disrespect to Aldershon Clifford, as we've discussed. To his credit, the guy finished his career with the game of his life in the freaking Rose Bowl. But there's no denying that when it comes to arm talent and the ability to make throws, Drew Allar is the better quarterback. Also, again, I think Cephas, being a different player than Tinsley, he's got that speed to stretch the defense and command the respect of defensive backs that Mitchell Tinsley did not have. And that's where he could really impact this team in ways Tinsley didn't, because things like that can help free up a Keandre Lambert-Smith, a Trey Wallace, a Malik McClain, the tight ends coming across the middle, whatever it might be. The impact that Cephas can have because of the type of player he is goes deeper than just the stats. I think if he gives you the stats Tinsley had while being that speed deep threat that demands, just attention from a defense and helps open up other receivers, you're going to take that all day long if you're Penn State.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Sean, I think overall was a pretty damn good college quarterback. Doesn't get the credit he probably deserves. Did he have his faults? Absolutely. But yeah, Drew is on paper, a much more talented quarterback, that potential elite level quarterback that could take Penn State to the next level. The type of quarterback that can truly throw wide receivers open, put balls in tight spaces. So in that, yes, I think the ceiling could be a little bit higher. But I think overall, you're still. I don't think it would be fair for Cephas to expect, the Jahan Dotson level impact of 70, 80 receptions for 12 to 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns or whatever. Perhaps he does. Perhaps he does. But I think a more reasonable expectation would be in that 650 to 700 range. But that could quickly change depending on how the start of the season starts. We really won't know until the fall, close to week 1, really, because Cephas will not get on campus until the summer. According to my sources, all he has to do is graduate from Kent State. Just some credits. We're not going to transfer to Penn State. So as long as he graduates from Kent State this semester, he should be able to come in the summer and really make an immediate impact. You guys have any other thoughts on Cephas, or should we move to Malik McClain, who I think may bring a little bit more upside than Cephas overall, just because he is such a unique blend of size and speed.
Yeah,
So
let's
any
get
last
into
thoughts on Cephas?
no, let's get into McClain. I think
Oh yeah,
we're ready.
yeah. So Malik McClain, 6'4" wide receiver. Tied for Penn State's biggest wide receiver on the roster, tied with Malik Mega, who Mega also provides a similar skill set, big and fast, but Mega just hasn't unfortunately been able to put it all together for the Nittany Lions yet in his career. Has not found that consistency or the ability to find the field, get on the field at a consistent rate, which has hurt him. Will he be able to do that in 2023? I'm not sure. I wouldn't bet on it, but there's been bigger surprises. McClain, however, is somebody that we should expect to see either starting at the Z for Penn State this year, thanks to his ability to stretch the field, or as a key rotational guy that we're going to see almost as much as any starter. 6'4". His speed, I believe, is in the 4.5 range, which is pretty damn good for a guy his size. At Florida State, he had 33 receptions for 396 yards and 5 touchdowns over his first 2 seasons there, 24 games. Didn't have a huge impact, but as far as I understand, really nothing that he did wrong. It was just that Florida State recruits wide receivers really well, and he kind of got lost in the shuffle there. They have a lot of great wide receivers in that room, just got lost in the shuffle. He's a guy that Florida State fans and their coaching staff are pretty disappointed on losing. And I think this is going to be a big pickup for Penn State. And just because of his combination of size and speed, I just think his upside for Penn State is potentially through the roof. Now he has to put it all together. He has to be able to do it consistently. But I mean, that 6'4" frame is any quarterback's, dream, and go with that speed. I mean, who doesn't want to throw a 50-50 ball down the field to a guy who's 6'4"?
Yeah, I'll go first on this one. One thing that we knew that Penn State wanted to do with their wide receiver recruiting in the portal this cycle was get somebody with some size. Like you said, Malik Mega was the only guy even remotely taller than 6'3". He's at 6'4". So now you have a second guy, McClain. Not only is he tall, he can stretch the field, he can make contested catches. And the best thing about his game right now might be the fact that he is a devastatingly good run blocker. Like, it would not surprise me if Nick Singleton breaks off a 60-yard run at some point next year because Malik McClain put the guy across from him in the dirt. When you put on his highlight film, a lot of it is just him burying guys. He is very good in that, and I'm sure that's something the staff loved and was really drawn to with his game. But yeah, he could also make those contested catches. You know, you can, if you want to throw the fade, if Penn State ever wanted to get back into the red zone fade game, that's the kind of guy you throw it to. So like you said, he's got a lot going for him. He's going to be on campus this spring, so he'll be there for spring ball. That's going to be huge for his development. He's got 2 years left, not just 1, so that's huge for him. The biggest thing I think he needs to work on is his route running. And I think with Marques Hagans coming in as a developer, I think that's going to be big for him. So if he can get that route running to where it needs to be, there's no reason he can't be a starter and a top target for Penn State.
Great. Marty, what's your thoughts on McClain?
Yeah, I agree with everything Anthony said. You know, just sky high potential there. His run blocking is a lot of fun to watch. And I think he's a player that, you know, he's going to undoubtedly be compared to Devin Carter And while Carter probably has proven more in his career, I think McClain definitely has the higher ceiling and has 2 years of eligibility, like you said, on just one. So I think if you're Penn State staff, you're probably pretty okay with how things shook out there with ending up with Malik McClain instead of Devin Carter. Yeah, I think he definitely can contribute right away. Like you said, getting him in for spring ball is big. I'm sure right now if James Franklin and Marques Hagans are filling out that depth chart of wide receiver, they've got Keandre Lambert-Smith in the slot. They've got Dante Cephas outside. And they've probably got that or designation between Malik McClain and Trey Wallace for that other outside spot. And then you factor in, Caden Saunders, Liam Clifford, Amari Evans, assuming at least one of those three take a step forward. And all of a sudden, you're in pretty good shape with this wide receiver room for next year.
Absolutely. And let's, I guess, quickly just talk about what the Penn State wide receiver room looks like going into next season now with Cephas and McClain in the fold. These are just projections on our part. So their X, Z, slot designation could change, but this is what I wrote last week. Dante Cephas, I think right now we could put in the X slot for Penn State. Has good size, good physicality for that wide receiver spot. Tends to be your number one guy. But he also has, the speed to go in that Z spot. Keandre Lambert-Smith, I think, who has been playing Z, I think we finally see him move to the slot, use that speed to Penn State's advantage in the slot. And then at the Z receiver spot, it's going to be Malik McClain versus Harrison Wallace III, I think, this spring and fall to see who gets that starting spot. I think if you're Penn State, you're comfortable with either guy. And whoever's not starting, you have a pretty good depth guide there who could probably play both the Z or X if needed. And then your key main rotational guys going next year, names like Amari Evans, who could also play the X or the Z, Liam Clifford, who'll be in the slot, Caden Saunders, who'll be in the slot. And then your deeper depth guys, Anthony Ivy, Tyler Johnson, Malik Mega, and Christian Driver. Also, not Tyler Johnson, what? I'm blanking right now, of course.
Did you say Carmelo
Taylor? Carmelo Taylor will also be a part of the wide receiver room next year. Probably shouldn't expect to see him on the field too much next year, but worth throwing in there. So, the top 6, 7 is pretty good if you're Penn State. I think you have to feel good about it. You still have quite a bit to prove in that Amari Evans, Liam Clifford, Caden Saunders spot. But that top 4 of Cephas, Lambert-Smith, McClain, Wallace III is pretty good. Probably one of the better top 4 wide receiver groups in the Big Ten. Obviously, Ohio State's head and heels above everybody else, but I think Penn State could probably argue for that number 2 spot off pure potential heading next year, especially when you combine it with what they have at quarterback.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important that wide receiver room too is when you factor in the fact that you legitimately might have the best running back duo in all of college football, and you have one of the best tight end rooms in all of college football. That lessens what you need out of that wide receiver room, and that's where with you bringing in Cephas and if McClain pans out, all of a sudden you don't need as many guys to pan out. So yeah, they're in good shape there.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there, Marty. I'm a big fan of that mix of veteran experience with guys like Lambert-Smith, Cephas, McClain, and then you've got some youth in there as well, guys like Caden Saunders, Amari Evans, maybe Anthony Ivy takes a step up this year. I think there's a lot of potential in that room as well as a good mix of experience, and I think that lends well for Drew Aller. What a whirlwind that this portal cycle was for us fans, I have to say. A lot of twists and turns in terms of getting those receivers that we needed. Obviously, a few misses, guys like Prather and Thornton that upset some people in the fan base. But at the end of the day, I think it worked out pretty well. I don't think the staff is going to be complaining too much about the 2 that they have in the boat. And especially if they can put it all together on the field, it'll be nothing but a distant memory. But it'll be fun to laugh about, hopefully, a year from now.
Yeah, 100%. So I think overall, if you're Penn State, you have to feel good about the wide receiver room heading next year. Um, if an injury or two occurs, it's going to get a little bit dicey possibly, but I think you also at this point, one, you gotta trust what you have at quarterback, and two, um, I still, even with what they have at quarterback and wide receiver, I still expect the rushing attack to be the focal point of the offense next year with those two phenomenal running backs that they have in Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. Um, any last thoughts, guys, before we wrap this up? All right, everybody. Well, that is today's episode of the Penn State 365 podcast. My name is Dylan Callagahan-Croley. He is Anthony Hazan and Marty the Leap. Be sure to check us out next time. We'll find out what we're talking about, but probably going to start dipping back into the recruiting side of things. Penn State has hosted 2 junior days the last 2 weekends, has a third coming up this weekend. So we'll probably talk recruiting next time. And honestly, guys, we need to start talking spring position previews because spring practices are not that far away. There's probably just a little about over a month now until spring practice begin in March, early to mid March sometime. So gonna have to start talking about that too soon. Football is gonna be back quicker than we know it, especially with the recruiting cycles these days to keep us going in the meantime. Until then, everybody, have a good one. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.